Good morning, everyone. We are live this month, continuing to talk about our Women at Work research, which always looks weird back to front. Fiona will be joining me in a moment, but one of the things I guess we wanted to talk about is really this piece of what we see as a real, I guess, contradiction in the results. Let me just bring this down a little bit. There we are. A little bit of a contradiction in the results from, where things seem to be working. We certainly have maps on things like flexibility. In the research, 76% of women said they were satisfied with their current job. 67% of women felt that there were opportunities for them to progress. So there was certainly some really strong messaging. Morning, Fiona.
Hi, Kate. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I was just saying, there was some really, in our Women at Work research, there was some really strong messaging coming through where we seem to be making progress that, I am happy with my current job. There's opportunities for me to progress. I've got the flexibility. I think the flexibility was really interesting. 79% of women are satisfied with the flexibility of their job. There was some kind of contradiction around how that's applied across the organisation, which is consistent with what we've seen with, in organisations when we're working a little bit deeper. But I think this piece of, yes, we're making progress, but one of the, probably the most interesting, there was a few really interesting contradictions in the data, but one of the most interesting one was that 70% of women believe that management at their organisation genuinely support equality between men and women. However, only 46% believe women and men are paid the same rates for performing similar work. Now, this is often this is a challenging one because most people don't have line of sight over the reality of that. So it's an assumption piece. One of the things I always say to organisations is, the more transparency you can provide, the more information you can provide for people to have a real valid opinion based on information rather than a perception piece, which is in most organisations, I don't know and I'm guessing unless I've, someone next to me does the same job and I've asked them that question. So I think, there's always grains of salt in any research, and I think in this one also when it comes to people's perception around pay. But what's startling is management support gender equality, but I don't think, I've got this belief that men and women aren't paid the same, but I still think that my organisation supports gender equality. Now, of course, they can operate, they can exist as separate conditions, but it is interesting that we seem to have let go of this gender pay issue, or it seems to be it seems to be reasonably accepted.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess we could have a few hypotheses around, why this might be and what might be going on. And I think there's a piece here that very much links into, there's a thing called optimism bias, and we like to kind of think things are possibly better than they are. And, that might be something that's going on here. When you ask me at a macro level, are things going well? I say, my organisation is committed to this agenda around equality. But when we dive deeply into the data, there's definitely, as you were saying, some contradictions and some dissonance around what's the lived experience of people in the workplace. And some of it might be perception, as you say, but as we all know, for the individuals involved, perception is reality. And I think the other place where we can know that maybe the issue is still much bigger than people are acknowledging at a fairly simple level is the fact that 86% of people could identify barriers to their career progression. Now, not all of those are to do with the workplace, but certainly some of them are. So we've got some interesting things to look at. And I think what it sort of says to us is, as we are working more deeply with certain organisations, what is it that's going on for your organisation? What's happening to the people in your organisation, and what's the experience of the women? And also we're interested in the men, but what's happening for women that maybe we're not seeing so much alignment on some of these areas, and what would be useful would be finding out a bit more. Let's unpack it and see what's actually going on.
Yeah, I think particularly in this area, when I interviewed Libby Lyons for International Women's Day back in 2000 and I think it was 18, and we talked about who's the director or CE of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. And, you know, she talked about, you know, we're seeing progress on flexibility. We're seeing progress on, you know, I guess women ascending into leadership roles. Of course, we're seeing progress on women on boards, things like that. And we're not seeing progress on the gender pay gap and on bullying and harassment. And that's certainly what came through in our data. Fiona and I were talking this week around clients that I'm coaching to secure pay rises. And, you know, it's a fight. Like, it is a real tough, hard, emotionally draining fight. And we're talking, you know, we're talking reasonable numbers, right? We're talking $20,000, $30,000. So of course that's going to be something that takes a while. But, you know, we get to the end of these processes, and quite often the women that I'm working with are angry. Any goodwill between them and their boss and their organization, and any actual appreciation of value that often a pay rise comes with, is gone, because they've had to fight so hard for it, and they've been made to feel like that they don't deserve what they're getting. And so I've just seen that play out so much, and across so many different organizations. And it's, you know, it's not intentional, but what I do know is that men don't have that same experience. It's not as much of a fight. There's not as much pushback, and things seem to, it seems to be a little bit easier for men to have that big salary conversation. And I'm not talking about paying me $20,000 more because I'm doing a good job, and than I was doing last year. I'm talking about, you know, role expansion. I'm talking about additional responsibility. I'm talking about being paid different to market, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating piece. And as you said, we're often in conversations with women around how challenging this is, and also how the process is so really poorly handled from an organisational point of view. It doesn't end up in a good place, either for the organisation or the individual. And unfortunately, sometimes what happens is then people inevitably end up leaving because the process itself was so poorly handled. And I do wonder about this piece, you know, is there a lack of awareness around, you know, I actually let this go through much more smoothly for men, and yet I resist women when they start owning their value and speaking up and actually challenging the system. And I think that is a disruption. I think if we go back, and even if we look at our data from this survey, but if we go back and look at data that we did when we were researching the book, there's a lot that says that women tend to not ask as much and not push as hard and not demand as much in terms of their value. And I think that's led to a situation where it's surprising when women do. So when they do and so at an organisational level, you know, inevitably most of the negotiations are with senior men, obviously some with senior women, but it doesn't matter. If you're a senior person in an organisation, you're holding the company line to some degree, and you're not used to dealing with this dynamic. And, you know, again, a hypothesis, but I think there's something going on there that is definitely distorted against women speaking up and owning their value.
Yeah, particularly when we come back to, you know, the data around at least 52% of women think they're underpaid by 10% or more. And of those 52%, less than half have actually had conversations with their leaders around this stuff. You know, transparency of REM, conversations around REM, you know, the tip, particularly because we're in May, particularly clients who are working in organisations where REM changes are effective 1 July. I've got clients already seeding conversations. You want to be talking about remuneration increases when budgets are being talked about, not when someone is handing you a piece of paper and saying, oh, please, here's your confirmed pay rise. Once the decision's been made, it's very difficult to do it for anyone to be able to do anything. I mean, that's facts, because things have all gone through, everything's locked and loaded, and there may not be any budget for additional increases. So, you know, starting the conversation early is really important. Seeding the conversation, again, this week on Power Coaching with my Accelerate clients, we've been talking about how you start to seed so it's not a huge shock, particularly if you are talking about significant increases. You know, suggesting that you want to have a conversation, that you want to make sure that you manage your own expectations around remuneration going forward and understand where they're at. You know, starting to seed these things worked brilliantly for a client whose boss was based in the States, who was coming out, and they weren't going to have a stack of time. And in the end, they only had 15 minutes to talk about REM. And so, we'd worked on drafting a bit of an email, not long, like two sentences or so, just to see the idea that, hey, I want to have a conversation. I think my REM is out of sync with market quite significantly. I've done some research. Here's where I'm thinking from a total pack. Things need to land. Just so you know, let's have a conversation when you get here. What I've seen for in that situation, but in lots of situations, is a lot of processing and thinking happens between that point that you communicate that from an email or a conversation point of view, ideal but difficult often internationally, and when you then sit down and have the conversation, because they'll start to process and think about REM. And I think there is a piece around gender pay where I actually, I think there is it's not intentional. I wouldn't suggest that, a lot of people are sitting there going, she's female, let's pay them less. It's in my experience, when I've been working with clients where we've actually had to put that card on the table and actually say, well, so-and-so over there who's doing the same job and is male is earning significantly more, which is a big sword to lay down. Have done it once myself, but it takes a lot of courage to do that. So I don't think a lot of it's intentional. I think a lot of it happens, and maybe we're not so consciously aware. That's not an excuse, but I think the more that you can give the leaders in the business time to look across and obtain data and get some of the facts, the more that actually that conversation might be a little bit easier, rather than putting it on someone and often them getting quite defensive because you're accusing them of that, and we don't want to feel like we're doing it, and particularly if it's not being done intentionally, then they can get quite defensive.
Absolutely. As you say, preparation and grounding it in facts and making sure that it's really clear, but also that forewarning, because as you say, we need to give people time to actually absorb the information, not necessarily have that defensive reaction, because it could feel like an accusation. And I think, depending on the context and what's going on in the organization, you could possibly even link a gender piece in there. You could say, look, looked at the facts, looked at what people at this level are getting, and just so you know, there does seem to be, in some organizations, a skew that means that women are not fully remunerated. So, I think it's enough in the public awareness, and it's enough there that we can actually start linking in to some of the things that are happening.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, we might leave it there. I will drop a link below to a resource that we've got in the YPWA community called 7 Things to Do Before You Ask for a Pay Rise, particularly relevant now. But even if you're not in REM cycle, go ahead, download it, take a look at it, particularly the concept, I can't remember what step it is, it's 3 or 4, I think, around the value stack, articulating your value. It's a really powerful frame to be able to prepare and then present who you are, what you've contributed, and create the business case for a remuneration increase as well. Sophie, great to see you. Have an awesome day. I'm
you too, Kate.
Into the city. So guys, thanks for tuning in. If you've got questions around this or anything else, particularly in context of the book, we'd love you to post them below, or send us a private message in Facebook. Thanks guys, have an awesome day.
See you.